Hi, my name is Charlotte, and welcome to Tuliverse, where I share stories for a white bird, white animal union. I wanted to share a story with you today about the template. Whether we are digging in the dirt or excavating within our own consciousness, we will arrive at the template. I have always been a person who has been divorced from history ever since I was a child. I have never been interested in it in any way. And I've always kind of like, don't want to hear it when people talk about it. And I've never really been called to sacred sites. Like, I never had an interest in going to Egypt. I never had an interest in seeing sacred sites around the world unless I was called. And so I have known very little about them. I never paid attention in school when it came to history. And it is part of my signature to have this kind of mechanism where when I'm around people who are talking about something I'm not supposed to hear, so I won't be influenced by it, I have this hearing that turns off, and I just kind of, it's like, Charlie Brown. Or the same with my vision. If there are things that I am not supposed to really see, I kind of get this veil to keep the stream of my consciousness pure and to know where my information comes from, so I'm not confused about where it's coming from, that I know it's coming from me. I have been standing with people and involved with people where I virtually just kind of didn't hear anything. But when there's something I'm supposed to hear, I will hear it. Or if there's something I'm supposed to see, I will see it. And then it's just kind of like a quick flash. And then I will kind of go back into this kind of stasis of not really paying attention at all. So when it comes to history and when it comes to like symbolism, I am not very familiar with it or what it means. I have like this vague recollection of what certain things look like by just living on the planet, but I don't really know anything about it. And it's not that I'm not educated, it's not my signature to know. And so one day when I was at my template, this place I was called to call Tula that I created, I saw a scarab. And it was, this round circle with this form in the middle and these wings. And this was a while ago. It's hard for me to remember the date of it, but I remember where I was standing. And I saw this scarab up in the cosmos. And I saw coming out of the center of this scarab, it was a doorway, and coming out of the center, I saw these, it was extremely light on the other side. So it was like a doorway between worlds. On one side there was one world, on the other side there was another. And through this doorway of this scarab, I couldn't see exactly what it was because the light was so bright, but there were these things coming out, and the light would come out with it in like not a stream or droplets. It was very, very difficult to explain what I was looking at. And I heard it will take many years for us to arrive. But when we do, even those who could not see will be able to see. And as of last summer, we can see, at least I can see, that this was an arrival time, possibly. It's my interpretation of it. And while I saw this scarab, I was like, wow, this is Egyptian. And, but I didn't know anything about the scarab, but this is what my consciousness has shown me. And then there were a couple of years in 2022 and 2023 where I was called to a certain area, and I wasn't sure why I was called to this area. And I went and I spent some time in this area, and I was called to, even though I had never read anything about pyramids of the earth and was never really called to them until at certain times I've been called. But I was called to a certain area to raise the pyramids for a new civilization. And at the end of that trip, I was in this country, and I saw this little crystal pyramid with little steps on it. It's like tiny. And I bought it to honor what I had done in the trip, to bring it back with me, to have something where I was connected to what I was doing, to be able to stay connected with. And the following year, I had a dream where I had this box. It was like a food item. And inside the box, I put my hand, and there were like smaller pieces. And I put my hand in, and there was something not of the same substance. And it was hard, and it was kind of much bigger than everything else in the box. And in my dream, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like the prize, like the Cracker Jack prize in the box. And as I started to pull it out, I woke up. And then a couple of weeks later, I had this box of this food item at my house, and I put my hand in it, and I felt the same thing I felt in my dream. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like my dream. It's the prize in the Cracker Jack box. And I pulled it out, and it looks identical in a way. It's smaller, but to this little crystal pyramid I had bought the year prior. And when I pulled it out and I was looking at it, I was like, oh, I'm going back to these places to continue this raising of the pyramids for a new civilization. In Tula, which was my template, everything I did there, I did from prayer and vision. So all the imagery, everything that came to me, everything I did was I was receiving through my own consciousness, where being divorced from history and really knowing a lot about some of the symbolism that I put there. And so I was excavating within my own consciousness to arrive at this template. And I wanted to share some of the things that I had there. I had a spring in my yard. I had a small little circle of stones, and these were there when the property belonged to someone else. And they were these perfect, beautiful stones. And I placed them in this little circle where I could do ceremony and have a place for the element of fire. And I also had a garden where I saved heritage seeds and had a place to save them. I planted things that would bring the birds and the bees. At some point, I had this very holy moment when a swarm of bees came to my property to stay there for a couple of days. And it was a big honor for them to be there. And my neighbor was a seed keeper, and she came to collect them. They had already left. And then she went around town to try to find them. And in my store, I had this storefront. If you've listened to my other videos, I had this little storefront. And in my storefront was something made by people that could be identified by their name and their picture. So everything in my store was made by an artisan, and I had either their name or their picture and name. So people could have this kind of reciprocity with them, even just if on a soul level of appreciation. I think it is very important to know in a template where everything comes from, so you can be connected with the people who made it. There is this kind of notion these days, it's kind of an accepted thing, where people shop other people's, creativity or intellectual property all over the place, like it's people are Pinterest. And people are very there's this kind of detachment from themselves and the people who actually created it. And we have this breath that we are given from our Creator. When Creator breathes life into us, it looks like a snowflake, how I see it. And each person looks different from the other. No snowflake alike. And with that, in that snowflake is our souls, or our blueprint. Our blueprint, the soul, I have always believed is a chariot that encases this blueprint. And when you have the pictures of the people who make things and the name, you can connect with them on a soul level. And there is, in this way of taking things from people and kind of using things from other people for branding or for a purpose, it very much dilutes the potency of what people bring, and the ability to connect with others. You have this magical breath that is only yours. No one else has anything like it. And you came to breathe it into creation. And people who essentially, I think, really know who they are kind of really in this knowing and being able to bring the magic of their blueprint to what they do. And then there are, these people who are utilizing images and ideas or missions of other people. And what they do is, if this is them and the magic they're supposed to bring, they pull from other people, which the life leaves the magic of these images or language. It leaves the creator and it loses all its life. And the person creates a shadow over what they're supposed to bring. So they're not able to kind of bring the magic that they're supposed to bring. And it is kind of a way of self-binding that, you are putting these images and language over yourself to make it look like it's you, but then you can't ever really experience bringing what you're supposed to bring. And then because there's no life in it, doesn't belong, it's not with the person who created it. People have to keep pulling from other people to get this feeling of the energy to try to have the magic. But the only magic is just with them, and really being able to bring what they're supposed to bring, and not of anyone else's. I think many women experience people thinking that you're a muse for other people and everything that comes out of your mouth belongs to other people. It's a cultural, planetary thing. And hopefully, that won't exist any longer, because it dilutes the template that one is to bring. And our template, or the divine template, people can create their template from their blueprint, and then they will attract other people who kind of have a similar tone as their blueprint into these templates. But the sacred divine template is protected, because only people that really know it and can speak it can bring it into life. And it is protected in the way that no one can actually access the blueprint of other people. When I was told, everybody has this protection mechanism where there is a smoke screen over everyone's blueprint. No one can read it, nobody can access it, and it is nothing anyone can take from you. And if there's an attempt to do it, where there's kind of this cultural acceptance of what I would consider a theft, where people don't think that there is any kind of cosmic law, and there's going to be no repercussions for it. However, especially in the past 2 years, I have seen people experience very severe consequences for doing that kind of thing. The attempts to, utilize the blueprint of other people. Very severe consequences. So it's important to, really get to know oneself, I think. I don't need anything from anyone. And I don't need anything from a book. I don't need anything from other people. I don't need anything from YouTubers or the internet. I just need my consciousness. And I will arrive at the template. But whether we are digging in the dirt or excavating in our consciousness, either way, we will arrive at the template. In making a template, especially if you're doing it on barren land, it's very hard work especially if you don't know anything about what you're doing at all. It can be very hard work. And so it's great to have a community where you can access resources, like my neighbor who was a beekeeper, or getting, garden seeds from other people, or being able to trade resources from other people who knew how to garden in the desert, for instance, and knew how to have a flat roof, or, and that kind of thing, where there's no access really to other people coming to help you. You really have to do everything your own. And, at least I did in a very small town. And it helps if everyone likes everyone. Where I lived, there was this eye of this vortex that was maybe, it was a block away. And it expanded out 30 minutes driving, because I remember tracking it one day and getting to the end of it. And it was out a 30-minute drive. And so at the eye of the vortex, the polarity is very close. And the opposite is always going to, there's going to be this way of energy seeking balance. So the opposite is always going to come and meet you, and it's going to come and meet you in an extremely close proximity. And so it kind of was irritating to the people in my community for that to always, balance was always being met through us. And it could be very unpleasant for sure. And I recommend not living in the eye of a vortex or within 30, at least in this case, 30 minutes within 30 minutes of a vortex, especially if it's on sacred land. And what I'm referring to here is land that was sacred to the indigenous people. And in this town was very sacred for many reasons, because there was a spring and a river, and it was a place where Geronimo used to come and soak his wounds, and different tribal people would lay their weapons down on the outskirts of town, and it was considered neutral ground or a place of peace. And then they put at some point landfill on it, and became very problematic for the people living there, just energetically, and for the indigenous people. And so I never recommend living on sacred ground. And if you come across that unknowingly, to work that out with indigenous people together for unification, to make it a happy place for everyone. In places like this, it can be very difficult to live. But if you can make it in an environment like that, spiritually, you can make it anywhere, especially if you stay for a while. And in this template, people would come there. It was for the very, very few, which was kind of frustrating because I slaved over this place. But it was always so interesting to me because it was cut out of the fabric of time. And people would walk by and it was almost like it was invisible. And I would have people come and visit and they would say, when I'm here, I feel like I'm in heaven, but when I cross the street, I feel like I'm not. And I would have these very, very few people come and stay with me. And they would enter into my house and have very similar reactions to entering into my house and the property. And people would come in and they would just kind of stand there and look around and kind of process in their bodies. And I would just kind of watch them be like, wow, what's happening? And when it was one person after the other, I would just kind of let them be in that. And they would say to me, like, I can feel your hands in everything, or everything is living here. I had some very special people come and stay with me, and it was a really nice confirmation to create a living ceremony on this earth plane. And people would stay with me, and then the next morning, my light went out. The next morning, I would go to their little cabins, and they would just kind of be sitting there just like, and I would say, well, how was your night? And they would just kind of like be processing this. And they would say to me, everything is alive here. And I would say to them, because all these people mostly were seers or had some kind of, otherworldly sense. And I would say to them, you mean in the way that you see everything living? Because everything's alive and talks? And they would say, no, not like that. And they would told me, well, your walls are alive. The furniture is alive. Your garden, your plants, like speak. There's so much more living than you realize. And I was like, because I lived there and I lived in the eye of this vortex, trying to catch my breath a lot. So I didn't, it was just my heaven, my home. And I was always very honored to hear people have this reflection about what I had worked so hard to create. And how does one make something living? Well, it's no secret to the majority of the people on this planet. But I didn't learn this from other people, so I knew I would make it living by ceremony. But I put, and that aspect of it I'm going to keep to myself, but I put my hands in everything. I made everything. I prayed with everything. I spoke to everything. I loved everything. I cried with everything. Screamed and raged with everything. It was just, I put my hands and made everything. And that was how I made this template living. And in my template, there was an aspect to it, which I will say now would make it out of balance, and even then did make it somewhat out of balance. then. And I believe it is the relationship between the masculine and the feminine. And in the last 5 years, for me, it's been a very important part of my path. And I share, anytime I share about this and any other stories where I'm talking about the divine union or meeting a balance between the masculine and the feminine of equal galactic tone, what I'm specifically speaking about are relationships that are non-physical and non-romantic. So there's no physical intimacy or romance involved in the relationships where I have partnered for creation in the last 5 years. But with this specific template that I was making there in Tula, I was married. And we had all these places where people could live or stay. And if there were women who would come, there would, the biological need would set in to be fight for queen or, take the king or, I don't know, take the queen or whatever the terminology is. There was a lot of that going on. And it was a struggle to keep the balance because of that. And I believe it was because there was a physical, between the two people who were building this, there was a romantic connection, a marriage, and a physical intimacy, and that this somehow muddled, it just muddled things and brought all these other aspects of ourselves into play. And in my experience in the last few years of not having that involvement in creation between the masculine and feminine, none of that comes into play. I mean, it can a little bit, but not like it was there. And I believe it's a big part of creation in the future, is having these non-intimate, non-romantic relationships that are the pentacles of these templates for creation of equal galactic tone only. And while there is coupling to meet human need, I think there will be for touch, for intimacy, while there will be this coupling, there will the pentacle will be seeking this equal galactic tone without any romantic or physical intimacy involved for creation. I remember what it's like, what intimacy and procreation is like on the first heaven, the first planetary heaven and the first creation. And there's no touching involved. Procreation, no touching. Intimacy, no touching. I have this beautiful story about this situation with the masculine and the feminine, and there being physical intimacy and non-physical intimacy. And about 3 years before I got married, I was still living, I was at this property, and I knew I was going to get married 3 years before I got married. And Sometime later, I don't remember how long, I went into a store in this town and I saw this dress and I thought, I think I'm going to get married in this dress. And then about a year, maybe before I got married, I was driving down the street in a city and I was told to go into this store, which was like a flea market. There was something in there I needed to get. And I walked in there and there was a lot of stuff in there. It was a pretty big flea market. And eventually made my way to this rack of clothing. And on it, this rack, there was a dress. And I looked at this dress and I thought, oh, it's so pretty. Maybe I'll get an alternative to this other wedding dress that I found when I get married. And I was standing there looking at the dress on the rack, and it was like this beautiful vintage dress. And I was told, you're going to need a second wedding dress. And I said to my consciousness, because I'm going to get married twice? Or I'm going to need an alternative? Am I going to wear 2 dresses at one wedding? I never got the answer, but I had both of those dresses with me for the longest time. And this second wedding dress, it was always a mystery. And then one day, I saw myself wearing this dress with someone. And then I saw myself wearing this dress with another masculine. Oh, first there was a masculine, and then another masculine, somebody who would never choose a woman to be with. And we were like, there was no attraction there, but I saw myself wearing this dress with him, and then I saw wearing myself with another masculine person. And then I realized, oh, this is about a creation partnership. And it is not about romance or the kind of love we think we need to find in a marriage or physical intimacy. This is about creation. It's beautiful and emotional to reminisce about my template, my heaven that I came to without any books or any other knowledge, prior knowledge, and just learning along the way. And that is the story I have to share with you today about the template and how we can arrive in it either by digging in the dirt or connecting with it historically or excavating it only within our own consciousness. From an individuated breath of God. Until our next story time, take care.